kids, phones, and the classroom. The intersection has created a fraught and occasionally frightening reality for students and teachers. Florida is currently a proving ground for some of the most stringent phone bans, with some schools prohibiting all cell phones and smartwatches during school hours, even between classes. We want to hear from you. How do you think teachers should balance the ubiquity of cell phones with the need to maintain order in their classrooms? We're talking to experts from every angle. Elizabeth Winings is a psychiatric nurse practitioner and assistant professor of nursing at Jacksonville University. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Dr. Deanna Seymour, a psychiatric nurse practitioner who specializes in behavioral health for children and adolescents. Welcome, doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Mary Hunt, a high school teacher with 11 years of experience in Duval County.
Thank you for having me.
Good morning. I'm going to have you pull that microphone right towards you. Joining us by phone, DeWitt, now retired, who taught for 34 years in St. Johns County schools. And Melissa Colson, a mother of 3 students in Jacksonville, navigating this issue at middle school, high school, and college levels. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for being here. Mary, I'm going to start with you if I can. You were right in the thick of this issue daily. What do people outside the classroom not understand about how cell phones impact educators?
Cell phones right now are useful and they're distracting. So I think for teachers, it's really hard to kind of find a balance. Which apps do we use? Which apps are useful in the classroom? Are students going to be able to access distracting apps, TikTok, Snapchat, any social medias? So it's really hard for teachers to regulate that. They want to use phones. They want to use different apps because that's what kids are really good at. They find some of the new apps. They find ways to make them really fun. But then it's hard to know what they're really using when teachers are teaching and when they're trying to get students in groups.
DeWitt, you are on the phone. You retired after more than 3 decades in the classroom, including in Duval County and 17 years at Mill Creek in St. Johns County. How does the pre-cell phone era compare to what you experienced in the years before your retirement in 2022, excuse me?
Thank you. It's vastly different. Pre-cell phones, there was so much more socialization between children, conversations, talking, learning from each other. With the cell phones currently, that aspect of their social life has been cut drastically. They don't socialize like they used to. They communicate through text messaging, social media apps, and that conversation, that verbal skill that we all developed when I was a child, how to speak, how to talk, how to interact, for some kids, that's just not there.
Elizabeth Winings, as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, you see this issue from a more clinical perspective. What's the relationship between kids and their cell phones? How does it maybe be disruptive for the learning environment?
So I would say that it depends on the child, and it depends on the family system, and it depends on the school. There's a lot of factors that are going to influence a child's relationship with technology. I think the biggest challenge is when technology, whether that is a phone, a laptop, a tablet, a switch, and we could make that list really long, how it is introduced to a child. Because once a child believes it is theirs within their possession, or that there are no clear limitations around it, that is where we start to see a slippery slope, because it starts to feel like something is being removed from them when there are limits set. So I think that's the biggest thing I see clinically, is getting clarity around the limits and rules when accessing a device. And when I say accessing the device, when is it within your possession? And then when is it not? Also, what are you allowed to access on that device? And kids are super creative, and they can access things that adults may not know that they are.
Dr. Seymour, what is the level of, if you just had to phrase it as an addiction for children when it comes to their cell phones? Are they experiencing like a physical relationship, like a withdrawal type syndrome, if they don't have their phones in their possession?
In my experience clinically, what I've noticed is that there can be very, very strong reactions to having phones removed. The conundrum of the cell phone is there are very positive parts of utilizing a cell phone. For example, you can stay in connection with your peers. It's almost difficult to be part of the group, which is very important developmentally for the adolescent, if they are not engaged somewhat in social media. On the other hand, there are obviously dangerous practices associated with being on the cell phone and the places that they can go on the cell phone, and the cyberbullying and other behaviors that occur in the context of the social environment online. So, yes, there are strong responses to having that phone removed. Going to what Dr. Winings said, they feel a strong sense of this is part of their identity and their right to be part of the social group.
We're learning more and more about, the addictive properties, or sort of the, the ways that kids get roped in. I think daily there was some testimony just this week before the Senate Judiciary Committee about how the algorithms in some of these programs are being created specifically to induce and perpetuate this relationship that kids have. And at the same time, they're often having very negative experiences on social media. I think there was testimony to the fact that 55% of the kids that they surveyed had had a negative experience just within the last week, whether that was a sexual advance by someone, or a bullying or incident like that. And so the harm very much coming with the positives you mentioned.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I'm going to say, Melissa Colson, you're the mother of 3. You've been through probably a lot of cell phones, wrecked cell phones, I'm guessing. I've, as a mom myself, probably dislike cell phones enough for both of us. But tell me what your experience has been. Is it different for the different ages of your kids? Do you find that their relationship with the phone is different based on when they started using one?
Yeah, we started coming into this issue as both of our sons were heading into middle school. It seemed to really begin to progress very quickly. So my husband and I were having conversations about how do we take something that is a very powerful tool that can be used for good, but also has a real perspective of leading into not great things. And so our goal in seeing our children head out is what does it look like to raise healthy and mature 22-year-olds heading out into the world? And so when it came to middle school, this became a thing that we were having discussion about. And how were we going to approach it? We weren't trying to run from it, but how do we take something, a very powerful tool, and put it into mature hands? So I've seen that both with them, and I now have a 13-year-old. I definitely think that the issue has progressed even faster, and it's something that we've continued to have dialogue about. And just as parents, we've been ones that have held off, both giving our kids phones when we started engaging social media, and just have kept that discussion alive, just as these very progressive years where a lot of development is going on. What are the influences we're wanting in their lives, and who are those voices? What are the places we wanted them to be hearing from, and wanted to still maintain the ability to kind of see that navigated well.
We're talking about kids' cell phones in the classroom. We want you to join the conversation. Call us at 549-2937, tag us on X at FCC On Air, or send an email to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also message us on the First Coast Connect Facebook and Instagram pages. Lee DeWitt on the phone, you have spoken about parents being on the other side of the phone here very often with their students. Talking to Melissa Colson, sounds like she's a responsible parent when it comes to, her child and cell phones. But you've had a different experience as a teacher. Describe what it is that you've seen in your classrooms.
The cell phone usage that I've experienced was in an elementary setting, so it wasn't quite as accessible. They were to be kept in backpacks turned off. But in the middle school part of our school, children were allowed free rein. They walked. They didn't talk. They just stood side by side walking on the phone. There was no conversation between them. They just were on the phone. And the problem I have with that is that in St. Johns County, the rule was, and I'm not sure that's even still a rule there, that you had to be connected to the guest internet. You could not roam free. You had to be on the guest internet for St. Johns County, which blocked social medias and certain platforms. Well, you can't police that. When you have hundreds of kids on phones, you can't police what signal they're all on. So we would find that in lunches with the middle school kids, they're all glued to their phones, and you may have a group of children sitting where one child, two maybe, isn't allowed access to certain things on the internet. And when the kids are using their phones in a group setting and they're accessing certain sites on the internet that may not be appropriate, children whose parents do not want them doing that are automatically involved in it by virtue of that one cell phone that's doing it. So there are some kids who can stand up for that and say, I'm not allowed to see that. I'm going to walk away. But when the reality is, they're going to look at it. They're going to get exposed to it. They're going to hear song lyrics. They're going to see pictures. They're going to watch movies that might not necessarily be what is appropriate for them and in their family situation. So it's difficult to police what they're doing when they're using that cell phone. And me personally, I'm also a parent. I appreciate the moms that police that and that they're responsible and they teach their children. We did that as well with our children. Our boys were the last ones to probably have cell phones, only because we felt that it wasn't something that they needed. I see the need for it in some situations with parents. I don't see the need for it in a classroom when you have access to computers that can give you everything you need.
Thank you. So we're hearing from Brian on X. He says, when I was locked in a closet with 25 students during an active code red at the middle school, cell phones were the way students communicated safety to parents and received communication from the outside. We knew who, what, and where was happening before the lockdown was lifted. That's one perspective. I've also heard, though, that some teachers are concerned that during an emergency like that, they really want kids focused on what the teacher is telling them, how to respond, where to go. I'd like to ask you, Mary Hunt, as a teacher, what is your experience in terms of the balance of the sense of a need for a safety outlet like a phone versus the distraction it poses?
I can see the argument from both sides, where we don't want students to have their phones at all because we want them to be paying attention. But now, as a parent myself, I can see it from a parent's perspective and from that teacher's perspective, that the students having their phones, connecting with their parents, letting them know that they're okay, letting them know what's happening around them. It's really reassuring for the parents. It's reassuring for the students. They feel a little bit safer. But as a teacher who's done many code red drills in many different school settings, when students don't listen and they're not paying attention, they might be over by the door when it should be locked. They might be by a window when the room should look like it's empty. And it could make the environment dangerous. So I think a balance has to be found. I think that means a lot of people in schools looking at different ways to change the policy to make it work for everyone, considering what parents would like, having that connection with their student, but also considering the whole purpose of that kind of drill in a situation is to keep everybody safe.
So some parents obviously have expressed concern about limiting phone access as a safety concern, but the Orange County School Board, which has been really aggressive on banning cell phones throughout the day, even during lunch and class breaks, they have approved that. But one school board member talked about a different kind of safety concern that she thought involved cell phones. We're going to hear a little sound from what she had to say at the board meeting when they approved those stricter measures.
Our number one concern is to make sure our kids are safe, and what's happening with social media, with bullying, with the fights, almost all of them tie back to the cell phone.
Elizabeth Winings, talk to me about that.
Well, this is one of the things that I talk about most often clinically, and even in my role at Jacksonville University, teaching future clinicians, how are we going to navigate an ever-changing world where technology is a part of it? And just speaking to what does the data say, because that's what we practice, evidence-based medicine. And I brought with me a really lovely read, a scoping review of the literature. And I just wanted to say the first 6 items that is in the literature saying what are the real risks, what is the safety concern with our children and adolescents. This is international, by the way. This is not just an American problem. This is international. Number 1 is depression. 28% of the literature shows that depression is the concern with students using social media and apps. And then it goes on to talk about diet, nutrition, relationship with food, body image, cyberbullying, sleep, addiction, and anxiety, and then sex-related or exposure to inappropriate content. The list goes on, but those are some really important things for us to be mindful of as adults when we're making policies and we're talking about keeping our children safe. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in children and adolescents. And it depends on the data that you look at. There are some improvements in that area, but it's a real concern. We have to be mindful that we're the adults in this situation, and we need to make decisions that keep our children safe mentally, emotionally, and physically.
We have a caller I'd like to go to. Colleen on line 2, I believe, gave her child a cell phone in middle school. Hello, Colleen. Go ahead.
Hi. Yes, I just wanted to make a comment that there are two comments. One is I broke down and did buy a cell phone for my middle school student daughter. And before that, she was an avid reader, lots of series of books, and really, very involved in reading. Once I gave her the phone, and I did take it from her from time to time, of course, and that was a big battle. But ever since then, and she's already just graduated from college in May, and she did fine. But the reading was it was amazing. There was just no more books, not even books on on that you could read on a Kindle or anything. It was just completely bizarre. It was definitely an addiction. And I know it is still to this day. And when we toured colleges, I went to the University of Florida in Gainesville. We looked at schools, and I noticed that even on campuses, it was so quiet. You could walk through the whole campus, and everybody's sitting outside. It was unbelievably quiet. Everybody was either on a laptop or on their phones everywhere. I was just like, wow. So I know I wasn't alone, but I definitely would. It was amazing, the change just from, having a phone. So
Thank you, Colleen.
comment.
No, I appreciate it. And if you could see in this room when you talked about, the reading decline, everybody's head is nodding. Dr. Seymour, what is the connection there between, competing for attention? What's happening when you see kids' interest in something like that decline because they're using a telephone?
So during the adolescent years, the brain is going through some very significant development. And during that time, there is an increased dopamine reward, an oxytocin reward that comes from peer approval. So it could be a laughter at something that's posted. It could be, another, like likes and other positive responses. So those particular responses increase the feeling of well-being for that young person. And I think what happens is they become so used to that, and they like it so much, and it feels so good that it's difficult for them to find ways of feeling good in other ways. They almost lose their ability to feel that dopamine from other more natural sources, which is one of the dangers of the constant use of cell phones.
We've got a caller on line 3, JD from Sea Island, Georgia. Good morning, JD. Go ahead.
Good morning. I've been listening to this problem that we have with the kids in the schools with using data and everything. But I believe there's a very simple fix here, very software that these schools can get. There's a lot of federal office buildings that actually have this software that shuts data down. You don't have to take the phone away from them. You can just shut the data off using the software.
Thank you, JD. We're having a little trouble hearing you, but what about that in the classroom? Mary Hunt, are you find that software is enough of a solution for blocking kids from accessing TikTok and the other things that they're using?
I can't really speak to some of the newer apps and how teachers could use that. But in about my 3rd or 4th year of teaching, they were trying to use scramblers and different devices to try to keep kids from using their phones. But it wasn't effective then. I'm not sure if it was just how it was implemented or how many devices they had around school. But I know then they attempted it, and then it was sort of abandoned after that.
Dr. Wining.
Yeah, so I would say that would be a lovely solution. And I think we have to keep brainstorming. What are the different ways that we can come at this? Because it's not that technology is all good or all bad. But I have the privilege of sitting one-on-one with my children and adolescent clients. And in my office, everything is confidential, in Dr. Seymour's office. And I have to tell you, they are so savvy. A parent might put a limitation on access to this app or that. And I have kids come in and they are sharing how proud they are of finding a loop around, or this person told me that. And they're growing up with this exposure, and so they are faster than us, and they are more motivated than us to keep the access. And so I think we have to keep having these conversations on how do we keep them safe and have healthy exposures. In the same way, when we start talking about substance use, right, exposure to, we're just going to keep this very narrow, alcohol. We don't, blindly just expose children and adolescents to that. We have huge curriculums around it, keeping them safe. What does that mean? Why is there a legal limit? I think we need to be having those conversations around access to cell phones, technology, and those types of things.
Has that been taught in classrooms? Is the risks and hazards of social media taught, Mary or Lee DeWitt?
They do teach them how to be safe on the internet. There are some courses that we would show the kids to teach them about internet safety, but it's more than just a student problem. It's also a society and a parent problem. Nothing makes me cringe more than when I go out to a restaurant and I see a family of, just for example, 4. The parents are on the phone and the kids are on tablets. That just sends a shiver up my spine, that here you have a moment for interaction, quality time, conversations, talking to your children, even your spouse, and you're not doing it because you're so addicted to what you're seeing on the screen. And I do feel there's a component of addiction for a lot of kids where these cell phones are concerned.
Melissa Colson, as a mom, what happens when you go out to dinner with your family?
Yeah, it's interesting. As we said, and Dr. Winings knows this, but we waited to give our kids cell phones until 9th grade, actually. So we're very late comers to actually giving them personal ones. We did have ways of accessing. We had a home phone that we used, like a roaming cell phone, that if a child needed to go and take it or needed to get access to something, it was kept in a common place. But one of the things when we were heading into middle school, as we were reading the data from doctors and the internet and all the different things, we were really concerned about what was going to be socially developing for our children in this. And the ability to have conversation was really important for us as a family. And so even, it's interesting, I had a conversation with my 20-year-old last night about this. And I said, hey, did we ruin your life not giving you a phone in 9th grade, till 9th grade? And he said, actually, looking back on it, I really am thankful. He said, I was introverted by nature. And he said, and my introversion would have stuck me in my phone as a way to kind of escape from having to interact with my peers. He said, what you did is it forced me how to have conversation with people around me. My second one, who is a little bit more social, said, actually, I would have been in a whole lot of trouble. And he said, because the reality is, what Dr. Winings has said is is that the reality is our kids knew more about cell phones. The moment that we handed those to them in 9th grade, they knew more on how to access than we were able to even teach them. It's not even something that they have to learn. It's just there. So part of that in middle school was we wanted to be the voices in our children's head. We wanted to be having those discussions with them. We want to be able to dialogue with them. And yeah, at moments it was uncomfortable, but it was keeping the discussion alive with them, telling them the whys behind the decisions we were making, asking them to trust us in our wisdom as we kind of were looking to navigate this, and allow them to push back on us. But how do we have this well and successful instead of them having to go here to these devices and looking for the answers there?
We have a call. Peter from the South Side has a comment about kids using their cell phones in schools. Good morning, Peter. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. Good morning. I think we're all missing the point. Part of the reason for an education is to create citizens who know what's going on. I have 2 granddaughters who are on the phone. They're both in their 20s. Fortunately, neither of them vote because they have no idea of what's going on in the world around them. They get whatever they get from their cell phones. They don't see the news. They don't bother watching it. They don't, of course, read the newspapers. So how can these people possibly function as citizens when they're going to vote on real issues? Thank you.
That's a good question. Mary Hunt, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so something that I was thinking about was just how students are lacking skills because of their reliance on their phones and especially social media. We get that instant gratification. Students aren't learning how to actually research. In fact, one of my friends teaches a language at a local school, and one of her projects was provide 3 famous French people. The names of 3 famous French people, do a little bit of research, and 2 of the people that many students put down in different classes, one of them was Martin Luther King Jr., and one was Henry VIII. I'm not sure how exactly they Googled, but students are just punching something into the search engine, and they're putting down the first thing that they find, and they're just skimming it because that's what they do on social media. And a lot of us do that. A lot of us trust stories. We read things on Facebook. I have conversations with family members. They said, did you hear such and such? I said, but did you read the article? Did you actually read it? And so I think students are lacking a lot of skills. Me, as a former history teacher, I find what this caller is saying to be kind of hitting home, because in the classroom, we're kind of desperate to get students to pay attention, and we're trying to meet them in this digital environment. But we also have to kind of cut down some of the traditional ways of teaching. And I do think students are very much lacking a lot of skills just in the world, and how to research and how to actually read things for content and for actually learning something to learn it, and not just reading it to have the answer.
So I think that's something we see also at the college level. So I teach in the classroom in that area. And so I think
You teach at Jacksonville University?
Yes, I do at Jacksonville University. And some of the challenges that we're seeing even there is critical thinking. And so how do you take something that you find on the internet, analyze it, and then draw an informed conclusion from reputable sources? And so that's really important, especially when we're creating future healthcare providers, and that's something that we take very seriously. The other thing I think is important when we're talking about elementary, middle, or high school students is their brain development. They do not have a fully formed brain, which is why they're learning, which is part of that creating healthy humans in the world. And so, yes, there is not a fully formed prefrontal cortex, which means we're going to have difficulty with self-regulation, with impulse control. Personality is still developing, all of those really important things. And so this is not necessarily just a conversation around opinions. This is a conversation around neurobiological needs and developmental needs of our children. And so that's where, as the adults, we need to be mindful of what is their neurobiological development and what's appropriate for them to be exposed to.
So we've got a comment from Van on X. He says, there's an option for a screen time control on phones. My 8th grader has restrictions, and they're set so that they can only have contact with family during certain times of the day. Lee DeWitt, I want to ask you about that, because you had spoken to me briefly yesterday about the use of Apple Watches.
Correct.
And those being used to distraction by parents to their students.
Yes. When the kids have Apple Watches, the parents can text through the Apple Watch. There's no noise. It's very quiet. And so oftentimes you'll see students with an Apple Watch looking at their watch, and it might be a mom calling to say, hey, I'm picking you up at 11, when in fact all the parent needs to do is come to the school, tell them they want their child, they call to the classroom, and the child goes. I don't see the need to interrupt the learning that's going on with that quick message by a parent. I'm driving home a point, I'm teaching something, I have them right where I want them, and one student's on their Apple Watch, and it loses and it breaks their train of thought, and it breaks their concentration, all for the fact that somebody's mom wants to say, hey, I'm picking you up at 11. That's a total distraction, and it's an absolute deal breaker during a lesson when you have them where you want them, and then that takes them away.
So we have a comment from Chanel on Instagram for the group here. She says, what age do you deem appropriate for children to have their own cell phone? I'll start with Melissa, because you waited to give your children cell phones. Did it change with your youngest child?
We've still not given her own personal cell phone. We still have, we call it our home phone, and we send it with her in case of emergencies if she needed to get in touch with us. But she does know it's not her phone, and it's something that we're navigating with her in appropriate moments of where, like, a student needs to get in touch with her. Where do we send it to? But it's kept in a common place for that. So we have held off on that for a lot of the same reasons I keep hearing: the development, the things that I hear, the inputs, their ability to develop has been huge for us. How do we make them great learners for life? And how do we go about doing that? So we have been, we found in ninth grade, it was time, honestly, more because the schools, I think my husband showed up for a meeting and had to scan a QR code to get the syllabus, and so we said, okay, we're heading into a whole new world here in ninth grade. So at that moment, we deemed it, okay, the school has now set this expectation. This is now a moment to navigate this with our kids. How do we use this in a mature way? How do we use this in a way to use it for the good things that are needed in the classroom, the ways in which the teachers are asking them to interact in this moment?
As medical professionals, is there an age that you'd like to put on it?
I think it's hard to put a hard and fast rule on this because it really does depend on the child's maturity and ability to handle that responsibility.
And perhaps the parents' management of it.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it actually depends on what we're talking about. So if you're talking about access to a phone, flip phone, let's go, jitterbug. I'm not sure if that's still around, but so if we need access to our children, I think that's something to discuss. What's the family preference? What's the need? But then when you're talking handing your child a smartphone that has access to the internet or a smartwatch, those are completely different. And I would say, yes, it depends on the child, but really there's a large national campaign called Wait Till 8th. And so I think if you're going to ask for general consensus, that is something that is there around that age. And I would say the Developmental Academy of Pediatrics has spoken up and said 0 screens from age 0 to 2. So I know that's younger than school age, but that's also something we need to be mindful of as parents. What behaviors are we modeling? So.
Really good takeaways. Obviously a lot to talk about on this subject, and I've had some great voices. I really appreciate y'all being here. Thanks, Mary Hunt, Elizabeth Winings, Dr. Deanna Seymour, Melissa Colson, and Lee DeWitt. Thank you all so much for being here.